This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting the podcast. You too can have an ad-free experience of the podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/gracefulatheist. If you're experiencing doubt, the dark night of the soul, or deconstruction, you do not have to go through it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Last week's guest was Holly Laurent. She's incredibly funny, and she is the comedic mind behind Mega the Podcast. Mega is an improvised satire in the world of a fictional megachurch. They've just released the first few episodes of a comedy investigative miniseries inside the world of their own show called The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills. The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills is a hilarious riff on the self-important truth-seeking that happens around church scandals and the twisted psychology of those who are inside them. This miniseries is chock full of ridiculous scandal. If you think the real megachurch pastor improprieties we've seen over the last few years are bad, get ready for the outlandish hijinks of Pastor Steve Judson. If you're a fan of great comedy, parody, or just want a lighthearted take on deconstruction, then go check out Mega and their new miniseries that started on May 21st. Look up Mega now and follow them. You're not going to want to miss The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills. It's on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. Arlene interviews today's guest, Shifra. Shifra grew up in Hasidicism, a very Orthodox Jewish tradition. She was very highly constrained in what she could do. A part of this theology was that any pleasures experienced now in this world would be subtracted from those in paradise. So no pets and no seeking after pleasure. She talks about hitting the lottery in an arranged marriage. Her husband turned out to be a great person. Her and her husband began to, in our words, deconstruct Hasidicism. Her husband's great sin was going to the library. One of her husband's other deconstructed ideas was that of not spanking their son. And the culmination of that came when their young son was being abused at school. And in these schools, the teacher, Rabbi, would have a lot of power and ultimately was using corporal punishment against Shifra's will. And that brought things to a head. And she has this great line where she says, "So if you come to think about it, my husband's first transgression, so to speak, of trying not to hit our children has started us on the journey of liberation." Today, Shifra is more spiritual but not religious. She has a YouTube channel at Shifra Lowen, as well as an Instagram, Yiddishi. Of course, links will be in the show notes. Here is Arlene interviewing Shifra.
Hi, Shifra. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
I'm excited to get to know you better. You and I connected last year when I was on an Instagram Live with Robert Affinis, who's also been on the podcast. And you and I connected after that, and we've chatted off and on and shared books. And so I'm excited to hear your story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I was born in the US, actually, but my parents moved to Canada when I was a little baby. So my story starts in a little village outside of Montreal,
Okay.
Quebec. And I was raised very sheltered, Hasidic, in a Hasidic way. So my education was in a religious school, so we didn't have like secular studies, like a curriculum in a public school. We had our own censored version of whatever it is we had to learn. If it was geography, if it was phonics, whatever it is, they hired people to censor out pictures of television, of dogs, stuff like that. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So I vividly remember as a second grader, I think it was, when we still had those goyish books, those secular books, for reading. And there was like a picture book, basically. So it was a picture of a dog and a family enjoying their pet. And it felt so, I don't know, like otherworldly, to have a dog to enjoy. Like it sounded so, I don't know if I wished to be in that story, but it was like an adventure to find out things that did not exist in my world. In our world there was no such a thing as a pet. We were not allowed to have dogs or cats because they are not a kosher animal. A bird is allowed, supposedly, but in our community, people did not have any pets at all. And the funny thing is, one of the other reading books had like a whole family of kittens that were born, and I was so jealous.
Yeah.
I literally wished that I could have a kitten.
Mm-hmm.
And I came home to my mom, and I don't know if I begged her or something, but she was like right away adamantly saying like, this is not allowed for us. And she told me that when she was growing up and she visited her grandfather, they had a little bird in a cage in the house. And she, I don't think she promised me to buy a bird, but I wish that one day she would, at least a bird. So back to the censoring the books. So as I grew older, it became a lot more strict to not expose the children to anything outside of the world of this little village. And we only had Jewish reading books that speak about doing good deeds, that are all like part of the religious curriculum, but just in the English language.
Okay.
So basically, what happened is I was told from a very young age that libraries are a bad thing.
Oh, wow. That would make sense though, because they can expose you to everything that you're not allowed to have
Correct.
access
It's a
to.
source of information. Like, what
Yeah.
greater danger in a sheltered community than to be aware that there is something else outside this little bubble that they created for you, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I still remember as a kid this huge poster that was in the hall of the school. I must have been in first grade, and I hardly could read what it said, but I asked someone and they explained to me that it said that libraries are forbidden, and even the ones that call themselves Jewish libraries, because
Wow.
next to Tosh, the little village that I was raised in, Kiryas Tosh, like a half an hour away is Montreal, and they have a
Mhm.
Jewish public library where even religious Jews come to find some reading material for their kids. But this community was very strictly Hasidic, and they were very against going to a library altogether. So on that poster, as a grade 1 student, I just like took that in so seriously. Like, it said clearly that it's the trap of the devil, and like you should stay away. As I grew older, I was a very diligent student, took in everything very seriously, and I actually started writing songs to glorify this lifestyle because I believed in it so wholeheartedly. And I wanted so badly to encourage people to stay on the right path, and not just to stay on the right path, but to give themselves away for God. Like, because what we were told is that this world was not ever meant to be enjoyed. It's just a passageway, and it's a place to acquire um, our rightful place in paradise. So basically, every moment of our lives has to be dedicated to accumulate as many good deeds as we can. For every good deed will earn us more joy in paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so, if you are enjoying on this world, then it will be subtracted from your. In other words, it wasn't like taught in a straightforward way. Like,
Yes.
it was very cleverly told to the kids in a way where when you say to somebody something straightforward, they have a chance to question it, right? And to think like,
Ooh.
does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? But when you say to somebody something subconsciously, if it's like between the lines and they just constantly repeat this message in different ways, then it becomes accepted as natural. Like, this is the way it just is.
That's a fascinating point. I don't know that I could have ever articulated it that way, but yeah, you hear messages, they're not explicit. Like, I don't know that I ever heard, I went to Christian churches. Don't know that I ever explicitly heard, if you do X, you will go to hell forever. But all the messaging around hell gave me the impression that there are certain things, if I did those, we didn't necessarily believe in losing our salvation, which, all these little phrases that you learn in whatever the religion you're in. But I knew there were certain things that were definitely off limits, and no one necessarily had to explain. So I know what you mean as far as they don't say it explicitly, because like you said, then you can question it, and they do not want you to question it.
Sure not.
No.
And actually, my husband was told, like, even like the time that's spent swallowing your saliva has to be dedicated for studying Torah. Otherwise, you're gonna pay a price, you know?
Wow.
So that's like a whole nother level, that the boys are taught a very different way than the girls. We're in separate schools. Like, you can't even call it a school. It's like a learning center or whatever, but they call it a school for the girls, and the boys, they call it a cheder.
Mm-hmm.
For the longest time, I've been so conditioned to try to find joy in serving God and trying to encourage others about the joy they will merit for sacrificing their life for God.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 17, my marriage was arranged, and I got married to a wonderful young man who happened to be the brother of my best friend.
Okay.
So I was lucky that
Yeah.
it was set up, like, very many people in the community got married to somebody in New York. And for me, I had actually somebody who lived in my neighborhood. I was already familiar with the family. I already liked the guy because he seemed to be a very kind-hearted person. So I was like, not just open to the idea, but I was actually excited to be part of my friend's family and all that. We got to meet for somewhere between 20 and 35 minutes. I don't remember exactly. Obviously, you know nothing about life. You're so sheltered. So,
Yes.
what the discussion is, it's just an official date to say that you met your future partner, because the law in the scripture or whatever says that you are not supposed to marry somebody before you see them. Hence, if they are ugly and you hate them, and it's not fair to them that you're gonna stay married, and you know. So basically, we had a date, but we didn't talk about our lives together. We just spoke about scripture, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember this glorious feeling, like, while he was talking, like, something felt so right. Like,
Mm,
I felt like at home with him, like it felt
good.
safe. And for the first time, I was like, after the arrangement was set, like, yeah, there's a ceremony where you break a plate, and you shout Mazel Tov. So it's like to celebrate that this engagement should be complete, and it's also to commemorate the broken temple. It's a whole custom the way they do the marriage arrangements. And what happened was I felt very much like I finally have somebody who I feel I can ask anything.
That's awesome.
Because growing up, some things were off limit, but it felt like this person is so safe for me. I was like overjoyed. I was so grateful the way my arrangement happened. It was really, really like, I don't know if it's one in a million that like really you have somebody you can click with, because it's randomly paired up. Like there's a matchmaker and they just see if the families match. So it's like really not.
Wow. Yeah.
It's really not so simple. So as I was saying, I was overjoyed, and we got married, and I was so ecstatically happy that I felt guilty coming to school. I worked at the school at the time. I felt guilty coming to school every day and like seeing that people have the regular kind of life that I've lived till now. And I wanted them to have this kind of joy that I have.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then my mother got concerned because she saw me like literally glowing, and she was afraid that my bubble's gonna bust. I'm gonna come down from space and I'm just gonna wake up to a different kind of reality. So she actually warned me. She's like I shouldn't, not only her. I remember my cousin also telling me, like, after the 7 days of celebration, um like the bells stop ringing, and it's like all the glory fades.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I didn't know what she was talking about. And then my mother was like, I saw the concern on her face, and she was like, sometimes it takes like about 3 months, and then you come down from the clouds.
Mm-hmm. The
Like
honeymoon
I was,
phase.
I was laughing in my heart because to me it made no sense. Like, I know whom I married. I'm overjoyed to be with this person. I can I feel safe with them. I feel at home with them. Like, what better thing like
Yeah.
can I wish for? Like, why are you thinking that this has to go wrong, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
But even though she didn't understand whom I married,
Mm-hmm.
she ended up being right, because marrying this guy in a place like Tosh
Mm-hmm.
was a recipe for disaster,
Oh no.
because he did not fit the mold. He was
Mm.
not a person who was going to thrive in this environment. So something had to give. It started being really, really hard, because in that culture, the expectation of a young man is to wake up extremely early, go to prayers. Um, if you have work, like in some families, the newlywed husband can go to work, but most families, they have to sit and learn at least for the first year or two
Oh
in
wow.
kollel. So you gotta be staying in kollel all day and just be a very good learner, like study the Talmud all day long and stuff like that. And my husband, he had a very troubled childhood, like traumatic, like next level,
Mm-hmm.
very abusive, and domestic, like a lot of turmoil, basically. His parents were fighting constantly, and it's no big surprise, because his father grew up in a home that was like straight out of the Holocaust. His
Oh wow.
father's father spent 6 years in the Holocaust. He was actually a gendarme outside of the Auschwitz crematoriums. He had to carry the burned bodies. The yeah. Like that's the level of trauma that was brought into his family, obviously. And his wife was also from Berlin. She witnessed the Kristallnacht, and that was my husband's father.
Yeah.
And it was an arranged marriage, so obviously not everybody is as lucky as me.
Yeah.
And he married the oldest of 15 kids who
Wow.
came from a very traumatic home as well. Her older brother had fallen down as a kid and hit his head and was not functioning properly. And she always had to not just take care of this big family of 15 kids, but also had to cope with taking care of that child. And she was uprooted from her childhood home at the age of 11, leaving all her friends behind, all her family, and
Wow.
her most beloved grandfather, everything behind, because her father believed that staying in Israel was a sin and they have to move to
Oh, wow.
England. There are a group of people called Natura Karte,
Okay.
and they go protest against the state of Israel
Okay.
because they believe that you cannot live in Israel and celebrate the state of Israel as long as the Messiah hasn't come.
Oh, okay. Because it's the Messiah who will reinstate Israel, not like government people. Okay.
Correct,
That
because
makes
there are
sense.
3 warnings, curses, or whatever it's called, vows that God made that you should not take back by force Israel, something like that. In any case, take a child who's been through so much trauma, match them
Yeah.
up with another child who grew up straight out of the Holocaust, and force them to live together while they are incredibly incompatible.
Yeah.
You can just imagine what kind of disaster that was. And not just that, in this community, there was no such a thing as birth control. So she had one
No.
child after the other. Literally, when my husband was 7 years old, he already had 6 siblings.
Oh my heavens. As a mom, and how difficult having little tiny kids was for my mental health, and I only had 2. That's a lot on your body and your mind and your family, and that's a lot. Oh my heavens.
Yeah, he was 7 or 8 years old, and he literally was the oldest, the only son of 6 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, he came from so much trauma. He
Yeah.
was suffering from depression and from what they diagnosed as OCD.
Okay.
And he was supposed to, in that state, function as if nothing is going on, as if he
Yeah.
had not gone through any trauma, and just function like a robot. Wake up at this and this hour, go to the synagogue, get there on time, study. He was such a devoted member of the community,
Mm-hmm.
but his body didn't cooperate with all these demands, you know.
Yeah.
So that's like the smallest challenge that we had, but it was a big one nonetheless. So it was a constant what is it called, like juggling. I was going to school hoping that he's gonna have left to synagogue by the time I get home to prepare lunch. And then I prepared lunch and everything, and I was so excited if I found that his bed was empty, because sometimes the depression was too strong. And obviously, so then you had, and I did not know about anything, right? We were not told about anything about mental health, nothing. But I just grasped, I understood that there was a lot more going on, and I didn't like think, oh, he's lazy. That's not how it was. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, that's good.
And when I got home and he was there, I was devastated, obviously. But even if he wasn't there, I would call him up, ask if he's coming home for lunch, because that was the hour that I had off from work at school. The school was just around the corner. And I was waiting and waiting, and I would call him to the kollel, and he would say, yeah, he's on his way, but maybe he was still in the middle of prayers and he had to finish, but he couldn't share with me because he was so stressed and worried about that. So he's on his way, and then he didn't arrive. So there was always this kind of juggling because he had to finish his obligations in the synagogue before he got home to eat. He couldn't eat before he finished prayers and all that. And I had to get back to school, so we were like missing each other. And I had warmed up the food, and then, gosh, it's gonna be cold by the time he gets home. Like that was like the beginning, right? When the bubble was busted, and it was all thanks to the structure. It was nothing with us, right?
Yes.
It was because of this unrealistic high demands that were put on this young couple, right?
Yeah.
Now take that to the next level when things really got hard. Imagine my shock and fear when I found out one day that my husband visited a library.
I was thinking, you're about to say you're pregnant, or oh my gosh, he had an affair. My buddy went to a library, which is just like this.
I love the examples you give. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. If I was pregnant, that would have been a joyous occasion, because in the community, like if you're not pregnant by the year, then something is wrong, and you got to go to the doctor and check if like it's a bad sign, you know.
Oh my goodness! But he went to a library. Now a Jewish library, which
A
is still
Jewish
bad,
library.
but okay. But we're at least he didn't go see all the heathens with their public library. Okay.
So that was like a shock.
Yes.
And at the same time, it was maybe exhilarating too, because like teetering on the edge, like I loved the thrill of like not staying in the stagnant like box, you know? So I was happy that he was actually introduced to the library by his dad.
Oh wow.
And I was only worried that my family shouldn't find out, because that would be terrible, you know? Like he would be considered like something is wrong with him. So I'm going to fast forward to when I had my first child turned 3 years old.
Okay.
My husband comes home one day and he's like, since our child is already 3 years old, we're starting to teach them the laws and like all the things that they should do, making a prayer before the food and after the food, and not touch any of the electronics on Shabbat and stuff like that. I want us not to hit our children. So I love the smile. You're looking at it. That's so beautiful. And I was horrified. I felt like he just fell off from the moon, and he's coming to me with this outrageous idea that makes no sense at all, because like how else will I ensure that I do right by my children? My teachers have taught us that if you do not hit your children, they will grow up wild animals. How can I sacrifice and jeopardize the future of my children, and they will not grow up to be God-fearing, good people if I do not hit them?
Okay, I have a question real quick. So at this point, did you know what he had grown up in yet, or did you not know any of that?
Yes, I did know a little bit. Like even now, how much is there that I don't know, right? But like, yeah, I had an idea. Yes.
Okay, so you did know that. The reason I ask is thinking of what he's coming from when it comes to hitting children. But I also, my husband and I very much were taught that we needed to hit our children in order to make sure that they knew they were under authority and obeyed the first time and all this stuff. And so anyway, go ahead. I want to hear how this plays out.
So thankfully, my husband is like the most patient teacher. Like he right away knew that my resistance and my anger was not because I didn't love our children just as much as he did.
Yeah.
It was because of this fanaticism that I was raised with, and he just needed to find a way to open my eyes and explain it to me. That's exactly what he did. So he patiently explained to me, he showed me in the holy books how the rabbis say that you gotta treat your child in their younger years with so much care, and to even spoil them in the first 5-6 years of their life, because that's the foundation of the person they become. Give them so much love and shower them with like all the comfort that you can. So that was a relief for me, that I have a backing in the holy books, even though it's very radical to my family, but at least I have something, I have a ground to stand on, right?
Yeah.
So I agreed. But obviously, I had no reference point. Like, how do you discipline a child without hitting? So that was
Yeah.
a stormy journey. Like, not easy at all, because you don't have a library to find parenting books from, right?
Oh, yes. Good point. Yeah.
So basically, it was not easy. Eventually, I'm going to skip a big part of the story where my husband was ostracized and persecuted in the community, a whole long traumatic experience. Eventually, we moved away from that little village of Kirjastash, and we moved to Montreal.
Oh, wow. That has to be a huge culture shock.
It was actually inside of a Hasidic community in Montreal, so the culture was not yet so drastic.
So it's change, but not quite
Correct.
as dramatic.
Like, it
Okay.
was a relief that I was not under the nose of so many villagers who could see my business every second of every day. I was like starting a new life, felt more liberated. I'm outside in the world. I can just walk into a pharmacy. I remember that first night after the moving truck left, and I had to pick something up from the pharmacy. I literally felt as if I had just went on an adventure to safari or something, Like, my goodness, I could walk the aisles and just meet people from all walks of life and just be, Like, I don't have
Yeah.
people staring down. Like, it's like free. Like you just have a chance to be in the world, not like boxed in somewhere. So basically, I enrolled my kids in a Hasidic school in Montreal, in a Hasidic cheder, my boys. That's a whole long story as well, because at first my husband wanted to send them to a place where they can learn English. And I was not ready for that, because I felt I needed my parents' moral support. I really needed my mom's moral support, even though we didn't talk much, but just knowing that she's on my side and not to alienate her with such a big, like, drastic change. She already was very not happy about how my husband was conducting, things,
Yes.
and the community had like really uh, uh, carried his name through the mud and all that. So I really needed her still very much, and I couldn't afford that kind of big step.
Yeah.
So I put them into a cheder that was supposed to be very good, according to the chief rabbi in Montreal. And in the beginning, it sounded like it was wonderful. My son came home smiling. He had things that he didn't have in Tosh. In the summer, they had day camp, which was not something that existed in Tosh at the time. I was in seventh heaven. Things are finally working out. I could breathe a sigh of relief. Or so I thought. The beginning of that school year, of that cheder year, was after the high holidays. And obviously, day camp was over, and he got a new teacher who was very strict, and he did not come home very happy. But I was in denial and like just hoping that, like praying that things will somehow sort themselves out, because I cannot cope now with any new hurricanes. I had enough. My ship was almost broken. I can't.
Yeah.
And then he came home one day and he said his Rebbe, which is what they call the teacher in Cheder, Rebbe slapped him in the face.
Oh, wow.
So I was horrified to hear that, because I had specifically made sure to keep close contact with the Rebbe, check in with him every week or second week, because I was told growing up that when you have a contact with the Rebbe or the teacher, then they pay close attention to your child, and that's the way to make sure that your child is well taken care of. And this Rebbe had assured me every single week, your child is an amazing kid, he's a tzaddik, he's the best kid in class, and all that. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I called up the Rebbe that night, and I tried to be diplomatic about it, but I was very firm. Like, I wanted to know, like, what's going on here. I didn't say it that way. I was like, I'm so shocked because you're telling me that my son is a tzaddik, but then he came home today and he said you slapped him. Like, I don't want to understand what's going on. And he's like, oh no, don't worry, don't worry. It was just that the kids were so rambunctious. It was like right before Purim. They're so excited, and I had to discipline them. So I made him an example. Just don't worry. Tell your child he's still a tzaddik. He's still the best kid in class. I hardly touched him. I hardly touched him. That was his claim. I was like so angry, but like I do here, like hopefully this guy got the message, right?
Don't hit my child.
Obviously he didn't.
Ah.
So this continued to happen again and again. And anything that I did, I called the administrator. It only got worse because the Rebbe was angry at my child for telling his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Literally had to beg my child to go to school, or basically not beg. I almost forced the child. I promised him good things when he comes home. And it was horrible, because like literally forcing my child into the lion's den. He was, every day that something happened in class, he was traumatized, even if it wasn't him that's being hit. Like just watching the kids getting hit.
Yeah.
And one nice day, my brave little boy finally had enough, and he ran away from Cheder.
Oh, wow.
So I was home minding the in the kitchen and stuff, and suddenly the door opens, and I'm like, that's early. It's 1 or 2 o'clock. Like, what's going on? And I see my son in the door. And that was it. Once he had the courage to run away, he gave me the courage that I needed. Because I did not have the boost to make that decision to take on another, like, unimaginable task of finding him a school in a place that I knew nothing about. Like, I had just arrived. I had nobody to ask. I did not know how to go about anything. And now that he had the guts to run away from Cheder, it was like, yes, thank you. We're not ever sending this child back to that Cheder again.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a wonderful feeling of like being able to tell my child, we are going to find you a better place, a better school. Like, rain or shine, we will have to figure this out. So if you come to think about it, my husband's first transgression, so to speak, of trying not to hit our children has started us on the journey of liberation.
Oh, wow.
Because this child was not raised in a place where it was normalized to be hit. Although I did from time to time still hit my kids. I did lose it sometimes. But it was not a thing that it was okay, that it is the way it's supposed to be. Right?
Yeah.
And that gave him the courage to know, no, this teacher was wrong. He had parents who believed it was wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if they themselves messed up. So thinking of how much that courageous step of my husband to have the patience and explain to me why this is important, actually, this freed me for life.
Oh, wow.
It saved our whole family.
Yeah.
Because what happened afterwards was even more challenging and more scary, because the community started rallying against us. Not the whole community per se, but like the leaders, the activists, the agents that are in charge of taking care that the bubble stays completely closed. They were trying everything they could to stop us from leaving this bubble. Imagine what happens if a whole family leaves a place like that and they open up a door for other people to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So they put everything they could into this case. We became a case, right? And they basically went and made a claim against us to Child Protective Services.
Oh my gosh.
Because after a while that we were trying to find a school, we didn't find, because they made sure to tap our phones, which I didn't know
Tap your
about.
phones.
And they were calling the schools to tell, don't accept their kids. They're crazy. They don't know what they want from their life. Like, don't start with this family. It's like a bad idea.
Wow.
So we were left without any options within the religious community. And that was the goal. And when the Child Protective Services got the claim that my child is being isolated and abused and blah, 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 and a whole long list of lies, they
Yeah.
had to investigate. So they sent to us a letter that we should respond.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was constantly warned by the activists in the community that Child Protective Services will come after you, your children will be taken away, we have already been living in this trauma that people will take our kids from us legally. We were told it's possible to do that. Because in Canada, there's a law that if the grandparents are denied access to the children and the children are used to having the grandparents in their life, then they can claim that you're abusing your child. I don't remember all the details, but it was
Wow.
serious. I knew that I had no language to defend myself. I hardly knew a word of English. Like I could tell you I like the color red, but I couldn't express my thoughts eloquently, like to understand how to find the words to say what I want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that they did. They had everything in place to make sure to fight
Yeah.
me on this, right? So for a long time, I've lived with this fear, and now when I got this letter, it was written in handwriting, no letterhead. So I was like, oh, this is just what they call in the community a pashkavil. It's just a random guy trying to scare me.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got a second letter, and this time it was typed up, but the names of the kids were like so hilariously spelled. Like instead of Eli Melech, it was Ella Jumbo, like stupid mistake that didn't make sense. That if it's a government agent, they should have my names in the records and not mess it up like that, right? Wrong, actually, because CPS does not necessarily check the registry of the Medicare. It's like they're two different departments. So they just write down whatever the person who called tells them. It's, you know what I mean? If they make a claim, you know.
And they spell things as best they can. Okay, I see.
So what happened was I didn't take that letter seriously either. Then I got a third letter. And this time it had a letterhead and it was typed up and it said, if you don't call us up as soon as possible, we will have to go to court and get a warrant.
Wow. Uh-oh.
So I had no clue what a warrant was. I was a girl who grew up in a sheltered community like Curious Tash, but I did know what court was.
Yes.
So I came to my husband very frightened, and I'm like, they want to take us to court. And I was like literally almost like trembling, right? And my husband calmed me down, and he's like, what are you worried about? You're not in the wrong here. You are
Mm-hmm.
protecting your child. You just tell the judge the truth. Okay, so I breathe and I'm like, okay, but still they're saying like I have to call them. And he's like, so call them. What's the problem with that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to call them. I already had experience in the community so many times that when you give a finger, they take a hand. I don't want to open the door to that kind of abuse. I don't know who it is. I don't trust them, you know? So my husband says, so don't call them. Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Oh dear.
Right? I didn't know what a warrant was. So what's the worst that can happen? They're going to take us to court. Okay, I'll tell the judge what's going on, right? Obviously wrong. And one nice day, there were police banging on our door.
Oh wow.
Open up, this is the police. And I was convinced that it was people from the community pretending to be the police. So first of all, I knew from my aunt that you should never open the door for the police, because once you open the door, you allow them to interrogate you. Legally, you have a right to refuse to open the door. So I told them, I am allowed to refuse to open the door. So they said, okay, but we're going to have to break down the door. So stay away, because they're starting. And I'm like running into my bedroom, picking up the phone and calling 911. People are breaking into my house. I thought it was people from the community.
Oh gosh.
So as I was holding the phone, talking to 911, my bedroom door opened up. And whom do I see? Blue uniform, police.
Mm-hmm.
So here I had escaped trauma from a community, hoping I came to the city where there is some kind of accountability. You can't just do with people what you want, like in the community,
Yeah.
right? If you're in danger, you can call police. And now, who are those who are attacking me? The people who are supposed to protect me.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because I had that experience, I can't really grasp, but I can have a glimpse of an idea what people of color go through, right? Because it was never meant to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that was the most traumatic day of my life, because
Yeah.
everything was like topsy-turvy. Everything, like my whole world turned upside down. So thankfully, I kept my calm and I explained to them, I showed them the letters, I explained to them what was going on. So that was a miracle that I was able to hold it together. And they saw my kids were happy. There was no abuse going on. They were like, okay, so
Good.
so now everything is understood. You're going to cooperate with us? Yes, sure, of course. Now that I know that it's real, you know?
That it's real. Yeah.
And eventually, I did find a school for my children. A whole long story with that, because the Child Protective Services didn't want to close the case so fast. A whole long story. I'm not going to get into it, but the most joyous day of my life, aside from the day that I got married, was the day that I was able to see my kids the first day of school going into a place where they are actually going to be allowed to be kids. They're actually going to be able to have an education that helps them, that gives them tools in life. They're going to have the childhood that we wish to give them that we never had, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I must point out, because this podcast is called Graceful Atheist, that I do not consider myself an atheist. I do consider myself an atheist of the cruel monster god that I was taught.
I see.
So that's in short. And I do love a lot of the things that I was taught in my childhood that I now recycled, and I'm using it to enrich my life instead of stifling my life.
There are things within Christianity that, like, things Jesus said or things I learned at church, that, like, I can keep some of those things. There's a singer named Derek Webb, and he was on the podcast, and he said God doesn't get everything in the divorce. Like, we should be able to keep some of it.
I love
And
that. That's
yeah.
cute.
So where are you now as far as what does spirituality look like for you? What does it look like for your family? Like, where's your hubby at? What Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that my hubby believes in God or my kids believe in God. You're going to have to ask them. I'm just talking about me. I believe in a benevolent God. I don't call it God, I call it universe. It's just because it's triggering.
I understand. Yes.
We are members of a community that's called Reconstructionist Judaism. So
Oh, okay.
we love it there because the focus is not on the rituals. Like my husband
Mm,
made me realize while I was still living in Kiryas Tosh how people are not important, only the rituals are important. Like you take the
mm.
parchment that the Torah is written on is a lot more revered than an actual human, you know?
Wow. Yeah.
So that's what really excited me about this synagogue, that it's not about the rituals. The rituals are a
Mhm.
side ornament, so to speak. We celebrate the holidays, Purim, the high holidays, whatever it is. But the
Mhm.
focus is not that you have to get those things exactly as a certain way. The focus is community. And that's what I love. I love community. I grew up in a little village, so there's nothing I love more.
Mhm.
So there is such a option of having your cake and eat it too.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we talk a lot on the podcast about community is a human need. Like, we are mammals and we need other people around us. And there are a lot of people who stay in whatever their religion is simply because if you leave, you will not have anybody. You may not have anybody. Even different people that I've interviewed and heard their stories on the podcast, like, finding people in real life is still hard. They've found lots of people online, but finding just in real life people is difficult. So that's awesome that you guys have a synagogue that where your values align instead of being in conflict. So Shifra, is there anything that I have not asked that you would want to talk about that I haven't hit on?
There's so much to talk about, but I don't want to waste another hour because we can't pack it all in. I'm writing a book right now, and the interesting thing is that you just mentioned about the loneliness. I recently uploaded a short video on my YouTube channel,
Mm-hmm.
which is on my legal name, Clara Wasserstein, actually. But you can also Google Shifra Lowen and you're going to find it as well. Basically, I shared my journey from utter isolation, how I found community again after having lost my faith in humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was shocked actually because after 12 days, I didn't even expect it. And I opened my channel and I see it has over 4,000 views already.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like such a um, basic human need, right? Connection is such a
It
basic
is.
human need. And people are, unfortunately, we live in a world where loneliness is so rampant because of this, uh, what is it called? Pretense of connection that we have on social media that is really not the way that we were meant to be connected in real life. So people are, I don't know, it's like starving for connection, basically.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Do you have any recommendations, books, podcasts, YouTube channels, anything that has been helpful to you over the years, or is right now just something you're loving?
So right now, something that I'm really loving is a podcast called Finding Our Way. It's by Prentice Hemphill. I really love how it grounds me. It really has a unique perspective on things that are happening in the world. And she interviews, like, I don't think that they are still continuing the podcast. I think it had like 2 or 3 seasons during COVID. And she's interviewing change makers and real incredible trailblazers. So it's phenomenal. Like it feels healing to me to listen to that podcast. I'm not a podcast listener. Like it sounds unfair that I'm on a podcast, but I'm not, like, I don't really listen to podcasts often. And that's one that I really love to go back to.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for being willing to tell your story and for your authenticity. And thank you again, Shifra. I really enjoyed this.
I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
My final thoughts on the episode. I really appreciated Shifra's willingness to hear new ways of thinking about things. So when her husband mentioned not using physical discipline with the kids, like this was a completely new thing than anything she'd been taught her entire life. But she trusted her husband's judgment. They were willing to have a conversation. He was patient with her. And like her kids are growing up in a situation where they know their parents will fight for them and not fight with them, love them, care for them, and just do things differently because it's better, rather than sticking with the things they always knew because that was just tradition. And the willingness of her and her husband to venture out, find a new school for their kids, to join a completely new synagogue, a new version of Judaism that aligns with their values, that isn't in conflict with the things that they hold dearest. It's just awesome to be able to watch a family, to hear about parents who are willing to do whatever they can for their kids, even if it flies in the face of everything they've ever known. So, Shifra, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was such a delight. We had lots of crazy internet issues, but we made it work and it was wonderful. And I really, really appreciate you being on.
The secular grace thought of the week is about freedom or autonomy. Often in these segments, I say, the truth will set you free. But here I want to talk about the freedom that we experience on the other side of deconstruction or the other side of deconversion. Obviously, the great irony is that within our religious traditions, we are told that freedom comes by being committed to our tradition, being committed to the community, being committed to the belief system, being committed to orthodoxy. And the irony on this side is that letting go of that orthodoxy, letting go of that restraining tradition, we actually experience real freedom. Another way that freedom is misused is in the hard right sense of rejecting any sense of obligation to community writ large or the world in general. I do think on this side of deconstruction, we become members of the community of the world. We have escaped the high demand traditions that we were a part of, but then we can voluntarily embrace our commitment to humanity in general and the people around us out of our secular grace, out of our concern for people, rather than the obligation of the tradition. Next week is community member Ben. You're not going to want to miss that episode. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.